The night was still young when the last car left the driveway, the sound of laughter and music fading into silence. My daughter, Caroline, still had bits of rice clinging to her veil. She looked tired, fragile, like a bird that had flown into a cage and realized too late the door had locked behind her. I was stacking empty glasses in the kitchen when the knock came at the door. Sharp. Businesslike. Not the knock of family. When I opened it, there he stood, Daniel, my brand-new son-in-law. His tie was loosened, but his smile was tight, rehearsed. Beside him was a man I had never seen before, carrying a briefcase and smelling faintly of ink and stale paper. "Dad," Daniel said, too casual for a man who'd known me less than a year. "This is Mr. Harlan, a notary. We just need to get some things squared away while everything's fresh." Mr. Harlan nodded, opening his case with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Out came the papers. Legal transfer forms. My house, neatly typed out as if it already belonged to someone else. Caroline stood behind Daniel, her face pale. She wouldn't meet my eyes. That silence was worse than anything. She had known. Maybe not the whole plan, but enough. "Sir, it's just routine," Daniel went on smoothly. "You've got a big place here, too much for one man. Caroline and I can take responsibility for it. You can live with us as long as you want, of course. Nothing changes, except the deed will be in our names." I remember staring at him, the words echoing in my ears. Nothing changes. That was the lie. Everything would change the moment my signature touched that paper. So I set the pen back down. Slowly. Calmly. My hands steady, though inside I felt the old anger rising like fire. "Daniel," I said, my voice low, "I've been signing papers longer than you've been alive. And the first thing I learned is never to sign anything in a hurry. You understand?" His smile faltered for just a moment. But then he leaned in, eyes sharp. "Of course. Think it over. But don't wait too long. These things work better when handled quickly." That was when I knew. He wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. And he thought he'd already won. I shook his hand, thanked the notary, and watched them leave. But in that moment, I swore to myself, if he wanted my house, he'd have to pay for every brick, every nail, every memory. He didn't know it yet, but the war had begun. The morning after the wedding, I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Not Caroline's gentle tone, not the sound of family. It was Daniel. Confident. Loud. Giving instructions in my house as if he'd lived there all his life. I pulled on my robe and came down the stairs slowly. From the landing I saw him pacing my living room, phone to his ear, speaking with the swagger of a man who thought he owned everything he touched. Caroline sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded tight, her eyes darting to me when I entered. She didn't speak. "Yeah, plenty of square footage," Daniel was saying into the phone. "Corner lot, solid foundation, value's only going to climb. Don't worry, paperwork's already moving. We'll get it. We'll get it." My blood went cold. He wasn't even waiting. He was already circling like a vulture, calling banks, maybe even realtors. When he hung up, he turned to me with that same polite smile. "Morning, sir. You sleep all right?" Caroline and I were just discussing some upgrades for the house. New kitchen, maybe a deck in the back. What do you think? I looked at him, at the way he stood with his arm draped carelessly over the chair where my wife used to sit. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "What I think is, you're moving awful fast for a man who just joined this family." His smile tightened. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. But he didn't back down. "Opportunities don't wait, sir. I believe in acting while the iron's hot." I sipped my coffee, steady as stone. And I believe in patience. You might want to learn some. For the first time, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Not respect, not even annoyance, it was calculation. He looked at me the way a businessman looks at an obstacle, something to be handled, pushed aside, or broken down. That evening, Caroline came to me while Daniel was out on another call. Her voice trembled as she said, "Dad, maybe it would be easier if you just let him handle things. He knows what he's doing." I stared at her, at the girl I'd raised, the one I'd worked myself half to death to protect. And in her words, I didn't hear my daughter, I heard Daniel's voice, whispering through her. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I only nodded slowly and said, "All right, sweetheart. We'll see how things play out." But in my heart, the decision was already made. He thought he was inside the walls now, thought he had control. What he didn't know was that I'd built these walls myself. Every brick, every dollar. And I was already planning how to bring them down on his head. 3 days after the wedding, I came home from the hardware store to find Daniel sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of folders. He had my bills spread out like he owned them, utilities, property taxes, even the receipts I kept neatly in envelopes. Caroline wasn't there. It was just him, sitting in my chair, drinking from my mug. "Sir," he said, without looking up, "I've been reviewing the numbers. This place costs more than you realize. Property tax is bleeding you. Utilities are through the roof. You can't keep this up much longer." I set the hammer and bag of screws on the counter and folded my arms. "Been keeping up just fine for 30 years, I said. Daniel leaned back in the chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. That smug look never left his face. "With respect, those 30 years are behind you. Times change. You need someone, younger, sharper, to manage things. Someone like me." There it was, the first real strike. He wasn't even hiding it anymore. He wanted control of everything, and he wanted me out of the way. I stayed calm. Sat down across from him. "Funny," I said, "a man who just married into this family talking about control." He didn't flinch. "I married Caroline because I love her. But let's not pretend this house isn't part of the package. It's too much for you, sir. You'll be happier when you let go." I leaned in close enough that he had to meet my eyes. "Let me tell you something, son. This house isn't a package. It's not a bargaining chip. It's the place I built for my family with my own 2 hands. And the day I sign it away will be the day they bury me." For the first time, his confidence cracked. Just a flicker, but I saw it. And I knew then that he didn't understand me at all. He thought I'd fold like paper. That night, I went down into the basement where the air still smelled faintly of sawdust and paint from the years I spent fixing the place up. I pulled out a locked box from under the workbench. Inside were documents Daniel didn't know existed, updated wills, titles, accounts that had nothing to do with the house. And one paper I hadn't touched in years, a quitclaim deed with my late wife's signature beside mine. I stared at that paper a long while, the memories of her voice whispering in my mind. "Don't let anyone take what we built." By midnight, I had my plan. Daniel wanted the house. Fine. I'd give him something to chase. But by the time he realized what I'd done, it would already be too late. It was a Thursday evening when Daniel struck again. I was watching the news, the sound of the anchor droning on about politics when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 shadows, Daniel, standing tall, and beside him that same notary with his briefcase in hand. Caroline trailed behind them, her face pale, her lips pressed tight like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Daniel came in without waiting for an invitation. "Evening, sir," he said smoothly. "We thought we'd finalize things tonight. No sense dragging this out." The notary opened his case and began laying out the documents, pages of legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. Deed transfer. My name erased. Daniel and Caroline's names written in neat black ink where mine had been for decades. Caroline stood frozen near the doorway, her hands twisting together. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I sat at the table, letting them spread everything out, watching quietly. Daniel mistook my silence for surrender. His smirk widened. "All you need to do is sign right here," he said, tapping the line with a gold pen. "Then you can relax. No more worrying about taxes or upkeep. You'll have peace of mind." Peace of mind. That was his pitch. Take away my home, my history, my life's work, and call it peace. I reached slowly for the pen, turning it in my hand. "So this makes the house yours?" I asked, my voice calm. "Ours," Daniel corrected smoothly, putting his arm around Caroline's shoulder. She flinched at his touch, but he didn't notice. "Caroline and I will take care of everything from now on." I leaned back in my chair, pen resting between my fingers. "Strange," I said. "Because I checked with the county clerk this morning. This house has protections on it. Deed can't be transferred without certain signatures." Daniel's smile flickered. Just a twitch, but I saw it. "What protections?" he asked too quickly. I set the pen down, folded my hands, and stared him straight in the eye. "My wife's. Before she passed, she signed a covenant that locks this house down. No transfer, no sale, not without her explicit consent. And last I checked, the dead don't sign papers." The notary shifted uncomfortably. Caroline gasped. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing," he said flatly. I pulled the old quitclaim deed from my folder, the one with my wife's signature beside mine. "You think so? Go ahead, ask your man here to verify." The notary hesitated, glanced at the document, then at Daniel. The silence stretched until it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Finally, Daniel snatched up the papers on the table, his mask cracking. "This isn't over," he hissed. "No," I said, standing tall. "It's just beginning." He stormed out, Caroline trailing after him with tears in her eyes. The notary followed, looking like he regretted ever walking through my door. When the house was quiet again, I sat back down and let out a slow breath. The first battle was mine. But I knew Daniel wouldn't quit. Men like him never do. And that was fine, because I wasn't finished either. For a few days after the notary stormed out of my house, there was silence. But it wasn't peace, it was the kind of silence that hums in your ears, that tells you someone is plotting just out of sight. Caroline barely spoke at dinner. When she did, it was always Daniel's words coming out of her mouth, soft and uncertain, but poisoned all the same. I knew it was only a matter of time before he came back. And when he did, it would be bigger, bolder, more ruthless. That Sunday afternoon, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the porch. I was rocking slowly in the old chair I'd built myself decades ago, listening to the creak of wood under my weight, when Daniel's car pulled up. He didn't even bother closing the door behind him. He marched up the steps like a soldier on hostile ground. "Sir," he said, his tone sharp but practiced, "we need to talk." I didn't get up. I just looked at him over the rim of my coffee mug. "Then talk." He leaned against the porch railing, staring out at the yard like it already belonged to him. "Look, I get it. You're attached to this place. It's history for you. But for Caroline and me, this house is the future. She deserves stability. Security. And frankly, you can't provide that anymore." The words landed like stones. Not because they were true, but because he said them in my wife's house. The same walls she had painted with her own hands, the same porch where she'd sat with me every summer evening until cancer took her away. I set my mug down carefully. "You're right," I said softly. "I can't hold on forever. None of us can. But I can hold on long enough to see through a man who married my daughter for 4 walls and a roof. His eyes snapped to mine, hard and cold. For the first time, he didn't bother pretending. You think I don't love her, he hissed. I think you love what she gives you, I said. And when that's gone, so will you be. The tension on that porch could have snapped a beam in half. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. Instead, he smiled that dangerous smile. Careful, old man. Don't say things you can't take back. That night, Caroline came to me. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the fabric of her dress, her eyes rimmed red. Dad, she whispered, please. Stop fighting him. He says you're being selfish. That you're making things harder than they need to be. Maybe if you just let him take care of everything, we could finally have peace. Selfish. That was the word she used. My own daughter, repeating his poison as if it were gospel. My chest ached at the sound of it, but I didn't lash out. I didn't scold her. I just looked into her eyes and saw the girl I'd raised, confused, frightened, but still mine. Sweetheart, I said, sometimes the hardest thing in life is to see the truth about someone you love. But sooner or later, the mask always slips. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. I don't want to choose between you, she whispered. And then she left the room. I sat alone in the dark, the house groaning around me like it knew what was coming. My wife's photograph watched from the mantel. I could almost hear her voice in my ear, don't let him win. The next morning, I drove into town. Straight to the courthouse. I'd made up my mind during the night. An old friend worked in records, a man who owed me favors from way back, when I helped save his family's farm from foreclosure. By noon, the papers were filed. Quietly. Efficiently. The house was now locked into a trust with protections Daniel couldn't touch, no matter how slick his lawyers thought they were. When I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, the weight on my chest eased for the first time in weeks. But I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel wanted control, wanted me broken. And I'd just put a wall between him and his prize. Walls make men like him desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. That was what I was counting on. By Friday, the air in the house felt different. Heavy. Caroline moved through the rooms like a ghost, speaking less and less, her face pale and drawn. She was trapped between her father and her husband, and Daniel knew it. That was his weapon, not strength, not cleverness, but the way he twisted her love into a leash. I was unloading groceries from the truck when I saw his car roll up, headlights off, engine too loud for the quiet street. He parked at an angle, blocking my driveway as though to stake his claim. My gut tightened before he even opened the door. Daniel stepped out, and this time he wasn't wearing his usual smirk. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, like a man who'd convinced himself tonight was the night he broke me. Caroline followed slowly, her hands clutching the strap of her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. When I walked inside, the scene hit me like a slap. Suitcases lined the hallway. Caroline's belongings, packed neat as a soldier's kit, her clothes, her jewelry, even the old photo albums I'd kept safe for her since childhood. They were stacked like I was already gone, like I'd been erased from my own home. Daniel was in my armchair. Not just sitting, lounging. Legs crossed, one arm draped across the back, holding a folded paper like a trophy. He didn't wait for me to sit down. Sir, he said, voice smooth but cold, it's time we stop pretending. You've had your chance to cooperate. Now it's time for you to move out. This house belongs to Caroline and me. He slapped the paper onto the coffee table with a flourish. An eviction notice. Not from any court, just a document he'd typed up himself, full of bold words and hollow threats. But the arrogance of it nearly made me laugh. Caroline stood nearby, her face ashen. Dad, please, she whispered. Just make this easy. Don't fight him anymore. The knife twisted deeper. Not because I feared losing the house, Daniel would never touch it, not while I breathed, but because my daughter truly believed I was the problem. He had poisoned her against me, drop by drop, until she couldn't see him for what he was. I picked up the paper, turned it slowly in my hands, and then set it back on the table. This your idea of law, son? A piece of paper from your printer? Daniel leaned forward, that nasty grin curling across his face again. You can mock it all you want, old man. But you and I both know the truth. You're not strong enough to keep this place. You're slipping. Caroline sees it. Everyone does. It's only a matter of time before the court agrees. There it was, the threat I'd been waiting for. He wanted to drag me into court, to brand me incompetent, weak, unfit to make my own decisions. A classic move, take the man's dignity before you take his home. I rose slowly, letting him see that my legs were steady, my back still straight. You've made one mistake, Daniel, I said evenly. He raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what's that? I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a slim envelope, sliding it across the table. You assumed the deed was still in my name. His smirk wavered, just for a moment. He opened the envelope with quick, irritated fingers, scanning the document inside. His face changed as he read. The trust papers. Ironclad. Binding. This is nothing, he snapped, though his voice cracked. We can fight this. A judge will. No judge can undo it, I said. My voice stayed calm, steady, the way my wife used to be when she wanted to end an argument without raising her voice. This house is locked in a trust. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It doesn't belong to Caroline. And it sure as hell doesn't belong to you. You can't touch it, not with your schemes, not with your lies, not even with a court order. The notary's visits, his threats, the eviction notice, it all crumbled in that moment. Daniel sat frozen, his face pale with fury. Caroline gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hands. You lied, Daniel spat. I leaned closer, close enough that he couldn't look away. No. I protected what was mine. You lied, to her, to me, to yourself. And now you've lost. He slammed his fist against the arm of the chair, eyes wild. This isn't over, he hissed. You're right, I said, stepping back. It isn't. Because I'm not done with you yet. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second a hammer on an anvil. Caroline broke first, sinking into a chair, her shoulders shaking as she whispered, "Oh God, what have I done?" Daniel stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. His car roared out of the driveway, leaving the house trembling in his wake. For a long time, I just stood there, the trust document still in my hand, the photo of my wife on the mantel watching over me. I thought I heard her voice, quiet and steady in my ear, "You did right. Don't waver now." That night, the house was mine again. But peace never lasts long when you've made an enemy like Daniel. I knew he'd be back. And when he returned, it would be war. The following week, Daniel made his final play. I knew it was coming. Men like him, they don't quit until they're broken. It was a Tuesday evening when I heard the engine outside. His car, pulling up too fast, gravel spitting under the tires. Caroline followed behind him, stepping out slower, her face pale in the porch light. He came in without knocking, waving a thick envelope like a weapon. You think you're clever, he sneered. Well, I've spoken to a lawyer. If the house is in a trust, we'll challenge it. We'll argue competency. You're old, forgetful. Caroline will testify. We'll get it. Caroline flinched at his words, but she didn't speak. Not yet. I stayed calm. I'd been waiting for this. You want to drag this through the courts? I asked softly. Daniel's grin was sharp as glass. That's exactly what I'll do. And when the judge sees you stumbling over your words, looking like a tired old man, they'll hand me the keys. One way or another, this house will be mine. I nodded slowly, reached behind the counter, and pulled out a folder I'd prepared days earlier. Funny, I said, sliding it across the table, because I already spoke to my lawyer too. You know what we found? He frowned, opening the folder. His eyes skimmed the papers. Bank statements. Debt records. A neat little trail of loans and gambling markers with his name all over them. Evidence of fraud. His face drained of color. How did you? Caroline gave me the first clue, I said. She mentioned the late-night calls. The secret meetings. I started digging. Turns out you've been drowning in debt for years. And you thought this house was your lifeline. Caroline's head snapped up, tears brimming in her eyes. Is it true, Daniel? She whispered. He tried to grab her hand, but she pulled away. Sweetheart, it's not what it looks like. I cut him off. It's exactly what it looks like. You married my daughter to save yourself. But you didn't count on me being one step ahead. I leaned in, lowering my voice so he had to meet my eyes. Those papers are already with the bank. With the authorities. The only choice you have now is whether you walk out of here quietly, or in handcuffs. For the first time, Daniel had no words. No smirk. No slick reply. Just silence. Caroline began to cry, but this time not from shame, from release. She looked at me, then back at him, and whispered, "Get out." Daniel stood frozen, his face twisted with rage, then stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the glass rattled. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Caroline sat at the table, her shoulders shaking. I put a hand on her back, the way I used to when she was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. Just stared at the photo of my wife on the mantel. She would have known what to say. Me? I only knew this: revenge hadn't brought me joy. It had brought me justice. And sometimes that was enough. Caroline stayed that night, and the next. Daniel didn't return. Maybe he was running from his debts, maybe from the law. I didn't care. My house was safe. My family, at least what was left of it, was safe. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help wondering, how close had I come to losing it all? And if Daniel ever came back, would I be ready to fight again? The clock ticked on in the dark, steady and unforgiving. And I knew one thing for certain: peace never lasts forever. Weeks passed, and the silence in the house was different now. Not the heavy kind Daniel had brought with his arrogance, but a fragile quiet, like the air after a storm. Caroline stayed for a while, drifting from room to room like she was rediscovering her own childhood. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the window in the old playroom, staring at the yard where she used to run with her friends. One evening, she came into the kitchen while I was fixing coffee. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, how could I have been so blind?" I set the pot down and looked at her. She was older now, grown, but in that moment I saw the same little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunder shook the windows. I wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault. But the truth is, love makes fools of us all. "You trusted him," I said gently. "And trust is a good thing. But you gave it to the wrong man. Next time, you'll know better." She nodded, though her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Maybe not. But you're still my daughter. That's something no man can take from me." Daniel never came back. Word reached us eventually: debts piling up, a warrant for fraud in another state. He'd burned too many bridges, and sooner or later, men like him get caught in their own fire. I didn't need to chase him. Life would do that for me. But even after he was gone, his shadow lingered. Some nights, I'd lie awake, listening to the creak of the old floorboards, wondering how close I'd come to losing everything. My house. My daughter. The last piece of my wife's memory. Caroline eventually moved into her own apartment, small but warm, far from Daniel's reach. She visited often, sometimes just to sit in the living room with me, sometimes to cry, sometimes to laugh. We were rebuilding, brick by brick, the way I'd built the house itself. And me? I learned something. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It doesn't erase betrayal. What it does is buy you time to protect what matters until the people you love find their way back to you. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I looked at my wife's photograph on the mantel. I imagined her voice, steady and warm, "You did what you had to do." I raised my coffee cup to her picture, whispering, "We're safe, love. For now." And in the stillness, I knew, safety is never forever. But tonight, it was enough.